Hello and welcome to World News Tonight here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. More NATO ships to patrol the Baltic Sea to address security concerns after undersea cables are cut again. More on that in just a moment, but before we dive in, let's take a look at the latest headlines. Evidence points towards the shooting down of a civilian plane by Russian anti-aircraft missiles. A major political party is focusing on getting Germany out of the European Union. Poland establishes an impressive presence in Washington, only a short walk from the White House. NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has announced the alliance will increase its military presence in the Baltic Sea after the latest suspected act of Russian sabotage. It is still unclear, though, what the scope of this boost will be and when it is expected. The European Union also announced it is preparing sanctions against the so-called Russian shadow fleet. Kazimierz Wyszak reports.
This Estonian Navy patrol boat was one of several sent to this part of the Baltic Sea on early Friday morning. Their mission? To protect the Estlink 1 undersea cable after its sister electricity line was damaged in what appears to be a Russian act of sabotage. But according to senior Navy officials, the Baltic Sea is too large for individual vessels to efficiently protect all of the underwater infrastructure, and this vulnerability is about to change.
Spoke with Alexander Stubb about the ongoing Finnish-led investigation into possible sabotage of undersea cables. I expressed my full solidarity and support. NATO will enhance its military presence in the Baltic Sea.
This statement by NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte shows the organization is done talking when it comes to Baltic Sea security. The Finnish police seem to share that sentiment after seizing the Russian tanker suspected of cutting the Estlink 2 cable on Wednesday.
Have you contacted the Russian authorities about this?
No.
When will you be?
We will not.
Finnish President Alexander Stubb said on Friday that it was Helsinki and Tallinn who asked for an increase in NATO presence after the Christmas Day rupture of the energy cable.
We have to continue work together vigilantly to make sure that our critical infrastructure is not damaged by outsiders. It's too soon to draw conclusions yet why this happened. We know who did it.
The European Commission announced on Thursday that it is working on sanctions against the so-called shadow fleet, Russian tankers using shady tactics to avoid Western sanctions. But experts say it won't be easy to implement these sanctions efficiently.
The ownership structures are often quite murky, interlocking ownership mechanisms and networks. So for the sanctions, it's not always easy to know who the owner that should be sanctioned is.
The Baltic Sea is one of EU's most strategic regions, responsible not only for billions of euro in trade, but also for the bulk of its energy imports and undersea communication lines. There have been at least 3 major acts of sabotage in the so-called NATO lake since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Last month, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk was one of the first Western leaders to publicly raise the idea of increased NATO activity in the Baltic Sea. Poland is closely monitoring the situation in the region as it is one of the biggest NATO allies with access to the Baltic Sea.
We have a vital interest here, but we also have our own installations in the Baltic Sea, in different locations. There is the Baltic Pipe, and we have cables connecting us with Sweden as well.
NATO is so far refusing to comment on what the scope of its increased military presence in the Baltic Sea will be.
Several countries, including Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan, have suspended a number of flights to Russia following the crash of flight J28243, as they await a safety assessment. Initial reports suggest the crash was caused by external damage from a Russian air defense system. Franciszek Pilis has more.
In this exact moment, 38 people lost their lives and 29 others were injured. Following initial investigations, Azerbaijan Air said the plane crashed due to external technical and physical interference, pointing fingers at the Russian air defense system as the cause of the accident. The Azerbaijan Airlines flight J28243 took off from Baku and was due to arrive in Grozny, Chechnya, less than 2 hours later. Instead, due to landing difficulties like GPS signal jamming, it had to fly across the Caspian Sea to Aktau, Kazakhstan, where it crashed. At first, the Kremlin suggested a collision with a flock of birds caused the plane to crash. After that idea was rejected, Russian officials said the Azeri plane was forced to divert its course due to a Ukrainian attack on Grozny.
Ukrainian combat drones were mounting terrorist attacks on civil infrastructure in the cities of Grozny and Vladikavkaz. Due to this, in the area of the Grozny airport, the Kovyo plan was introduced, meaning all aircraft had to leave the indicated airspace immediately.
According to the Russian official, dense fog also played a role in the incident.
Moreover, near Grozny airport there was a dense fog. Nothing could be seen at an altitude of 500 meters.
Local reports from the crash site claim investigators have already found both black boxes. 4 separate sources, including from inside the government in Baku, also suggested that the plane looked like it was hit by a missile from a Russian Pantsir-S air defense system.
But the reality is, I think when all is said and done, it's highly likely that this was shot down by a Russian manned, potentially a Chechen manned air defense system, probably a Pantsir-1, in the capital of Grozny. And that what you have is a series of errors leading up to that.
So far, all clues seem to point to a Russian air defense system as the cause of the crash. International airlines have taken notice, with companies like Azerbaijan Airlines, Fly Dubai, Israel's El Al, and Kazakh Air all suspending flights to Russia until they make sure it's safe to fly over the country again. Those who were fortunate enough to survive the crash were immediately transported to a nearby hospital. Some of them still couldn't believe what had just happened.
I was conscious when I felt the impact. I was thrown up, down, thrown up again. I was trapped in. I was being thrown back and forth. It all lasted for a few seconds, and then everything went quiet. And silence. Everything was quiet, calm. And I realized that that was it. We had landed.
Still, some were not as fortunate as Mr. Rakimov. Many of the 29 survivors of the crash still need urgent medical care.
Russian gas deliveries via Ukraine are set to come to a halt starting January the 1st, after Ukraine's refusal to extend the gas transit agreement. While Russian energy will continue to flow to Europe via a different route, these will only be marginal volumes. John Kennedy reports.
The long-feared shutdown of the main export route for Russian gas to Europe is imminent. However, unlike in previous years, the markets are better prepared to handle the fallout.
There won't be a huge gas supply crisis as it was in 2022 and in 2023. Approximately around 5% of total annual EU import comes via Ukraine from Russia.
So far, markets have shared this confidence, with future prices of natural gas standing at €46 per megawatt hour, some 7 times lower than during the 2022 peak.
So basically, it won't affect EU as a continent. It basically will affect only a few countries.
Some landlocked countries, including Austria and Slovakia, which are solely reliant on the Brotherhood pipeline deliveries, in theory will lose their only route of supply. However, there are options, even for Hungary, who doubled down on Russian gas.
For example, they have an opportunity to import LNG via Croatia. So Austria can do that from Germany, Slovakia can do it via Poland. So there are many options.
Our assessment revealed that there is enough non-Russian available capacity to replace all Russian gas supply in the region. It would create shocks, it would probably increase prices, but physically it is possible.
Russian gas will, however, continue to flow to the EU, with a few countries, including Hungary, still receiving the commodity via Turkstream, the only pipeline set to remain online next year. But its limited capacity will not allow Russia to maintain the same export volume.
The German president has dissolved the 20th Bundestag and scheduled new elections for next year. The anticipation of the February elections put a spotlight on the far-right Alternative for Germany party, adamant about Germany leaving the European Union. Sonia Agata-Biskan has more.
German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier has dissolved the country's lower house of parliament and set snap elections for February 23rd. This development follows the collapse of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's three-way coalition and his subsequent loss in a confidence vote.
According to the results of the confidence vote, the current government no longer has a majority. However, I have not been able to identify any other possible government majority in the conversations I held either. I am therefore convinced that new elections are now the right way forward for the good of our country.
The polls suggest that the opposition center-right Christian Democrats could become the biggest party in parliament together with its Bavarian sister party, the Christian Social Union. But polling in second is the hard-right Alternative for Germany, known for its strong anti-immigration stance calling for an end to German military aid for Ukraine and removing sanctions against Russia. To date, the party caught the attention of many high-profile people, including that of businessman Elon Musk, the owner of X.
Only the AfD can save Germany.
But this kind of sentiment towards the AfD is not universal.
Freedom of speech also applies to multi-billionaires, but freedom of speech also means that you can say things that aren't right and don't contain good political advice.
Most recently, the AfD pledged that if it took power, it would lead Germany to exit the European Union and abandon euro as its currency. But perhaps the party's grand ambitions should be taken with a pinch of salt.
AfD may have some successes in the regions, but in order to become a coalition partner or a leading party in the parliamentary federal elections is going to be a long way. It will take years, if not decades, for this party. So I would say that all their proposals have exactly 0% of chances to come into power.
Nevertheless, it could be argued that the AfD has managed to shift the political discourse towards the right, as seen, for example, in the Christian Democrats' tougher stance on migration. The traffic light coalition was Germany's first three-party government in decades. Analysts anticipate that forming a coalition in the current political landscape could be challenging.
The 29th day of pro-democracy protests is underway in Georgia. While people protest in the streets of Tbilisi, Georgian oligarch Bidzina Ivanishvili has been sanctioned under the Office of Foreign Assets Control list. Our correspondent Don Arlith will tell you more about the sanctions and the situation on the ground. Don, hi, what do you have for us?
Yeah, so almost a month of these protests here in Tbilisi. Today it was actually musicians and civil servants that took to the streets and gathered here in front of the parliament. A couple thousand people on the streets. Right now it's raining, so a lot of people have tried to find some shelter. This is how Georgians have been trying to keep the pressure on the Georgian Dream-controlled government. And speaking of pressure, of course, you mentioned those sanctions instituted against Ivanishvili, the country's only oligarch, who is the founder of the Georgian Dream Party, and he is the honorary chairperson. He's estimated net worth is around $8 billion, and finally the United States putting sanctions on him. This is something that was applauded by the demonstrators who are still demanding new elections here in the country. As a result of the elections that were held in October, of course, they say those elections were rigged and that the opposition actually won. Therefore, finally, some good news coming out of the United States to put the pressure on the Georgian Dream government. Now what we're hearing is that hopefully this pressure will continue to mount from the European Union, from the United States, targeting more officials in the Georgian Dream government and hopefully forcing some snap elections come over the next couple months. So that's generally the situation here, people applauding these sanctions, and of course we're all holding our breath to see what happens when they inaugurate the newly selected president on the 29th of this month. Of course, the former president or current acting president, Zhorbaishvili, says she's not stepping down. She's the only legitimate leader of any democratic institution left. So we're all holding our breath for that. Now back to you.
Holding our breaths indeed. I know you'll be keeping us abreast of what's going on in Georgia. Don, stay safe and thank you. South Korean press agencies are reporting that an injured North Korean soldier captured by Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region of Russia has died. Our Ukraine correspondent, Oz Kataji, has the details from Kyiv.
An injured North Korean soldier reportedly captured by Ukrainian forces in the Ukrainian-occupied Kursk region of Russia has reportedly died from his wounds, according to reports in the South Korean press, citing South Korean intelligence officials. Now, this does come amid reports from the White House that North Korean soldiers are suffering mass casualties in their military offensives in the Kursk region of Russia. There's been no word confirming the death of this soldier from Kyiv or Moscow or Pyongyang for that matter, but from the Ukrainian side on Monday, President Zelensky reported that more than 3,000 North Korean soldiers have been killed or wounded in their military offensives in the Kursk region of Russia. Now, it's believed that the North Koreans have as many as 12,000 North Korean soldiers stationed in Russia, ready to assist Russian forces, and Ukraine is currently concerned that number may be set to rise, particularly in light of these reports of mass casualties on the front lines. Oz Kataji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
That was Oz Kataji reporting from Kyiv. On Friday, Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs Radosław Sikorski confirmed the purchase of a new building for the Embassy of Poland in Washington. The new property will not only be much bigger in size, but will also be situated in Washington's prime location, located just 18 minutes on foot from the White House. Polish authorities spent $20 million to secure this spot. Aisha Abachi has more.
Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs Radosław Sikorski announced on X the purchase of Poland's new embassy in Washington.
I confirm.
Every embassy in every country is a prestigious building, and the more impressive the building, the better it reflects on the owner. Poland had a rather old building, which was purchased in 1910, and it was quite far from the center of Washington. This year, Poland is buying a building in the very center, a 9-story structure.
In contrary to the embassy's current spot, Polish authorities selected one of Washington's prime locations for their new headquarters. It is just a few minutes away from the White House, home to the president, the U.S. State Department, which handles the country's foreign affairs issues, and the Capitol, center of the U.S. legislative system. The current embassy building was purchased in 1919 by Prince Kazimierz Lubomirski for $160,000. Poland reportedly paid $20 million for the new property, which used to house the political science department of Johns Hopkins University.
It is a large building, that's its first advantage. In addition to the 9 office floors, where the consulate and military attaché will also be located, there will be a very large hall. There will be a lot of spaces where various ceremonies, meetings and cultural classes will take place. The building is essentially a multifunctional one.
Offices of the Polish embassy will be residing in the new location in 4 years after renovations.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has rejected a suggestion reportedly being considered by US President-elect Donald Trump's team to delay Ukraine's NATO membership for at least a decade as a condition for ending the war in Ukraine. Putin said it does not matter if Ukraine joins NATO today, tomorrow or in 10 years. In parallel, a study has found that public support for aiding Ukraine until victory has weakened across Western Europe, with many citizens favouring negotiations with Russia to end the conflict. Where does this leave Ukraine and the prospect of a just peace in that war-torn country? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Hanna Shelest, Security Programs Director, Ukrainian PRISM. Hanna, welcome back to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure.
So what do you make of Putin's comment? Doesn't matter whether it's today, tomorrow, or in 10 years.
Because that is very good in the line of the narratives that he's been sending since the day one, not only of the current full-fledged invasion, but much earlier. We understand that the narrative that NATO is a threat for the Russian Federation was one of the most successful for the Russian propaganda inside of the country, in the European Union and NATO countries, and in the so-called Global South. So now for him to agree that it's just the delay postponing for, let's say, 10 years, it means he's losing his main argument that it is not him who is guilty in this act of aggression, but he was just responding for the NATO enlargement.
So if we look at it from a slightly different perspective, what he's saying is, look, I'm not even going to talk about NATO accession in any negotiation. Is he, in effect, simply saying he's not seriously considering a peace deal?
First of all, let's be honest that for the last 10 years, we experienced different negotiations with the Russian president or the Russian diplomats. And usually most of them being used not for the compromises or finding the solution, but either to persuade Ukraine to surrender, to give something to the Russian Federation, or to take off sanctions from the Russian Federation, or just to have a pause during which the Russian forces could accumulate additional forces to attack again. So from the very beginning, the Russian side never been sincere about the negotiations. But then, when even they talked about the possible negotiations, usually they were coming not from the position that we are ready to discuss something, we are ready for some compromise. They've been coming with the demands that, okay, we are going, we don't care about what you think, we want these, 1, 2, 3. The biggest list was 20 points in Istanbul in 2022. But even the latest, he is continuing speaking about NATO, but he's about demilitarization of Ukraine in his quite a strange perception of this. But the precondition to all of this, that his team is still insisting that he will keep all those territories that are currently occupied by Russia and additional territories of Ukraine that are not occupied, but that comprises the regions that he would like to have. So Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk and Lugansk regions in full, even that now his forces are not and never controlled some of these territories.
Right, OK, so I'll come to the territory in just a second. But sources say, as we just heard, that NATO membership in 10 years was part of Trump's proposal for peace. Is there a chance that, you know, when Trump hears this response by Putin, in other words, he's not even interested in talking about it, that Trump might actually say, well, you're not serious about peace, we're just going to, you know, land on the side of Ukraine and push you out. We'll give Ukraine whatever it needs. Is there a chance of that happening?
Honestly, that is the big hope for us. Definitely, we are not so naive, and we understand that there are a lot of factors that can influence these. But the statements that the Trump team did during the election campaign, for several times they said that first day we would push the sides for negotiations, but in case Russia is not ready for the negotiations, we would give Ukraine a lot of weapons so they would be strong and would be able to defend their country. How serious they were and what does it mean to give everything needed. That's still the more political speculations, because we understand that currently they have mostly developed plan A. It is to push Ukraine and Russia to sit at the negotiation tables. But we already see that they are probably preparing plan B for this, as from the original, the peace would be in 24 hours. We hear the statements that no, that's impossible. We would work on starting negotiations as soon as the inauguration.
Right. Well, if they do happen, Putin is saying that he wants Slovakia to host those talks. Why Slovakia?
Slovakia is a good way how to divide European Union. And let's be clear about this. For Russia, the united European Union as united NATO is one of the biggest threats and something he cannot understand. For the 10 years of this war, one of his primary diplomatic goals were to divide European Union. He always preferred to speak separately. It was with Paris, with Berlin, with Budapest, with now it is Bratislava. So he always tried to have these one by one instead of all member states with the Russian Federation, because he understands that in this case he is in weaker position. Now we know that Slovakian leadership position is not that strong in terms of their political affiliation, how much they are supporting Ukraine or how pro-Russian they are. There are different forces inside of the teams, and they would like to have their political advantage, as Orban team just had. They would like to show that they are big leaders, so why not to be mediators? And Putin understands that definitely the countries like Slovakia or Hungary are not those strong mediators, so they are just manipulating with their political ego.
Right, a way of causing division within the European Union. Now, staying with Europe, public opinion for supporting, or public support for staying with Ukraine until the end is waning. The support has gone down, and more and more people want to see peace in 2025. How is that going to influence the political dynamic, do you think?
Ukrainians are the first one who would like to see peace in 2025. The question is that we are here in Ukraine under the daily attacks, and those who are tired from this war are predominantly sitting in the comfortable chairs in their living rooms with Christmas tree. So that's very much depends on the news and on the politicians, how much they are explaining the reason of this war and the consequences, that it is not just Ukrainian problem, that unfortunately the Russian Federation became the threat for the whole Europe, and Ukraine is now defending the possible threats for the European countries, European Union member states in the future. So when somebody is supporting Ukraine, it's not the charity, it is investing in your own security. We already see how Russia in the hybrid way provoked intervening in the domestic elections of the countries, breaking the critical infrastructure, all those cyber attacks, or just the recent days with the cables in the sea. All of this is the parts of the general picture. And that is Ukrainians can and try to explain it to our European friends, but it should be also the European politicians who are explaining to their voters why it is so important to support Ukraine.
Understood. Now, just changing tack, just for the last minute or so that we have left, Hannah. Ukraine is stopping the transit of Russian gas through its territory. Who is that going to impact more? I mean, Ukraine is, of course, earning money from that process, but it does stop the majority of Russian gas getting into the European Union.
Yes, surely that's always been quite a significant issue for the economy and for the politics of the countries where the pipeline is going on. And it is not a surprise, these discussions been for the last 3 years, that one day it can stop, because the main income for the Russian Federation, it is their energy resources. And that is what's sponsoring the war. So if other countries were not able to diversify their energy resources, plus they were not able to implement implement the proper sanctions that would limit Russia's possibilities to finance this war. Unfortunately, we need to follow these steps. But also think about this differently. The pipeline is the critical infrastructure of very dangerous matter. Considering the constant attacks of the critical infrastructure of Ukraine, to have Russian gas here, it is just to have an additional variant where to have the possible terroristic acts or the chances for the accidents. So here we have both political and security concerns.
Political and security concerns indeed. And yes, we also look forward to seeing how countries that are relying on that gas are going to replace it, probably with American liquid natural gas that's coming through right now. Hannah, thank you very much indeed for sharing your insights with our audience. Have a good evening and a Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same for you.
Thank you. And finally, in the last episode of On the Record this year, our very own Adam Yerser asked Marta Prokovic of the European Council on Foreign Relations and Marcin Zaborowski, Europe editor at TVP World, to peek into the crystal ball and share their take on how 2025 might pan out for Ukraine and Europe. So stay tuned for a fascinating conversation. But from me, that's all for the moment. Good night.